law. The Right to Information Act that we have in the country today in India is the result of a very long and a broad-based people's movement which started in the early 1990s in India in rural villages. People working on government projects were not getting their daily minimum wages. And when they went to the government officials and asked for their minimum wage, they were told that records of the government showed that they hadn't worked the whole day, and therefore they could not be given their minimum wage. So people asked to see the records of the government, and they were told those are secret. And that's where people realized that there was a very strong connection between their being able to access their basic rights, like a right to a minimum wage and the right to information. And the movement, which started in rural parts of India, slowly expanded and it grew and it spread to different parts of the country. And people from different walks of life, academics, journalists, lawyers, joined into the movement. And we finally had a right to information law that was passed in 2005. But before that, 9 states in the country also passed right to information legislations, which actually helped in the process of bringing about a very progressive law at the center. The reason being that as more and more states passed these laws, people used the law and realized how empowering it was for a common citizen and how important it was to have this sort of a law to be able to participate in governance. And finally, in 2005, we had a right to information legislation which came into effect. It is considered to be one of the more progressive legislations. It has a very wide coverage. It covers the central government, the state governments in the country, and all local governments. It covers all 3 arms of the government, the executive, the judiciary, and the legislature. It covers all bodies that are owned and controlled by the government and all non-government organizations that are substantially funded by the government. The private sector isn't really included clearly in the right to information legislation, but there are clauses in the Act which state that any information which the government can gather on private bodies, which come under any law for the time being enforced, can also be accessed by people. Therefore, a lot of laws like the environmental laws and others, which access information from the private sector, that information can be accessed by us as well. So the coverage it's got a very wide coverage. The exemptions are fairly limited and stringently defined. So there are exemptions related to information related to integrity and security of the state, commercial confidence, and disclosure of information which is prohibited by courts. Information is defined very broadly under the Indian Right to Information law. It is defined as material in any form that's held by the government, including records and documents. In fact, the right to information also includes the right to inspect documents, take certified photocopies of documents, and also take certified samples of government material. This is very interesting because a lot of people now actually, for example, if they have a problem with the road outside their house, they go out to the government and ask for a copy of the contract of the road and also ask for a copy of the sample of the road so that they can get it tested to see whether it actually coincides with the contract. And the information regime that has been set out, the practical regime, is extremely simple to use. There are public information officers who've been appointed in different government authorities, public authorities. These information officers are responsible for taking all information applications and giving people information. In case a citizen does not get access to information, there's an independent appeal mechanism that they can resort to. There are independent information commissions at the states in the country and also at the central level. These information commissions have the power to impose penalties on officials who violate the law. And in addition to that, there is a very important clause in the Right to Information Act in Section 4 of the Act, which requires public authorities to proactively disclose information to people. So all information, as far as possible, needs to be displayed proactively by the government in easy to understand language, local language, and easy to access ways, so that people don't have to ask for information in writing and also don't have to wait for 30 days to access information, which is the stipulated time frame. The law is being used very extensively in the country by people at the grassroots. A lot of the media does use the law, but in reality in India, it's really the people who are using the right to information law to access information from the government and to hold the government accountable. People are using it for a range of issues. For example, to get information on their ration shops regarding the subsidized food grains, to get information on health, education. One of the things that people have also been using information, the right to information law, is to access information on how their elected representatives are performing. In the areas where we work in Delhi, a lot of people from the slum settlements came up and said that we want to know what our elected representatives do once they're elected. They promise us a lot of things, but they don't deliver. And we have no idea of their performance after they've been elected. So we help people use the right to information law to access information on the performance of elected representatives, how they performed in the parliament or in the legislative assembly in terms of their attendance in the parliament, how many questions they raised and on what issues they raised these questions, and how they spend the local area development funds at their disposal. Each elected representative in India gets a local area development fund. And interestingly, this information we tie up with the media to bring out report cards of individual elected representatives. This is the performance audit. And this information has been used very extensively by people to hold their elected representatives accountable. For example, in Delhi, in a very water-scarce constituency, people used this information. When they got this information, they realized that their member of Legislative Assembly had spent 60% of his funds on constructing fountains and waterfalls in parks. And this is a water-scarce constituency. So they took this information to the member of Legislative Assembly and said, look, we've been coming to you for so many years, and every time we come to you, you tell us that you don't have funds. So why should we vote for you the next time if you are going to spend your funds like this? And as a result, the subsequent years, the information has clearly shown that the member of Legislative Assembly has spent the funds on constructing tube wells and laying water pipes to provide people water in that constituency. There are many such examples. There are several challenges, of course, that remain. The predominant one, of course, is the lack of a culture of information sharing, even 6 years after the law came about. This has manifested itself in a lot of information seekers being threatened. Last year we had more than 10 deaths that were recorded of RTI activists. Similarly, several states have put in place rules which go against the basic spirit of the RTI Act. So there are very high application fees that have been put in place, which make the process extremely expensive and therefore inaccessible for people. There have been repeated attempts by the government to amend the Right to Information Act after passing it because it became uncomfortable. So we've had several attempts by the government to dilute the law, sometimes by asking for the file notings to be kept out and so on. Most of these attempts have been thwarted and because of people's action and struggles. And there are some, of course, which have gone through. For example, under the RTI Act in the country, there is a Schedule 2, which exempts certain organizations from the purview of the Act. And there's a scramble amongst many organizations in the government to be included in Schedule 2 of the law. So just last month, we had the Central Bureau of Investigation, which is our premier investigation agency, which finally found its way into Schedule 2 and is now exempt from the provisions of the RTI Act. Progressively, junior officials are being appointed and designated as public information officers, and at the cutting edge, this creates a problem for people wanting to access information. There is also very poor compliance with proactive disclosure under Section 4 of the RTI Act. And this, in a country like India, the proactive disclosure is one of the most important ways of ensuring that information is accessible to people. And this is unfortunately is a big bottleneck. Poor record maintenance in many government departments is another one. And a very important problem from the law's perspective in the Indian RTI law is no time frame for the second appeal. So very often people don't get information unless they go to the independent information commissions. But unfortunately, in the absence of a clear time frame within which they have to hold an appeal and have to pass hold a hearing and pass an order, this is a big problem. There are also several attempts that are being made in some of the new legislations to introduce clauses which override provisions of the Right to Information Act. However, there is continued people's involvement. People continue to build pressure on the government. This is a public hearing in progress where people were demanding that Section 4 of the Right to Information Act be properly implemented. They were demanding that all the local area development funds of elected representatives be put out on boards in the local language in their constituency so that people can have access to that information. Thank you.